Captain Jake Morrison walked across the metal bridge of his ship and looked out at the giant space station ahead of them. The UES Sentinel moved slowly through the dark space between stars as it got closer to the biggest meeting place in the galaxy. Jake had seen many things in his 20 years of flying ships, but this place still made him feel small. The Galactic Council station was huge and bright with lights from 100 different worlds. Jake watched his crew work at their stations and felt proud of how far humans had come. 300 years ago, nobody in the galaxy even knew humans existed. Now they had ships that could travel between stars, and they sat with the great powers of space. Not as equals maybe, but they had earned their place at the big table. The communication system made a soft sound, and Lieutenant Danny Cruz looked up from his station. Danny was young but smart, and he handled all the messages that came from other ships. He pressed some buttons and spoke into his headset before turning to face Jake. Danny walked over to the captain and kept his voice low so the others could not hear. Jake knew from Danny's face that something was wrong. Danny had been working with alien messages for 5 years, and he could read trouble in their words better than anyone. The ship moved past 3 Vorthak battle cruisers as they got closer to the station. Jake looked at the dark metal ships with their sharp edges and weapon ports. The Vorthak were warriors who stood 9 feet tall and had skin like armor. They had been fighting wars across the galaxy for 1,000 years, and everyone knew to stay out of their way. Jake remembered the first time he met a Vorthak soldier. The alien had looked down at him like he was looking at a small animal. The Vorthak thought humans were weak because they were smaller and did not have claws or thick skin. Most aliens thought the same thing about humans. The Sentinel docked at the station, and Jake put on his best uniform. He walked through the long metal halls with Danny beside him. Other aliens moved through the halls going about their business. The Zephyrians floated past them in their energy suits that glowed blue. The Calorians walked by on their 6 legs, making clicking sounds as they talked to each other. Jake found Commander Lisa Parker waiting for them near the main meeting hall. Lisa had been working with aliens longer than anyone else from Earth. She knew how to talk to them and how to make deals that helped humans. Her job was hard because most aliens still saw humans as the new kids who did not know much about anything. Lisa looked worried as she walked up to Jake and Danny. She held a data pad in her hands, and her fingers moved across it quickly as she read. Jake could see that whatever Danny had found was bigger than just one bad message. The 3 humans walked into a small room where they could talk without other aliens hearing them. Lisa put the data pad on the table and looked at both men with serious eyes. She had been getting reports from human colonies at the edge of their space, and the news was not good. Danny opened his computer and showed them the messages he had been watching. For weeks, the Vorthak had been moving more and more ships toward human space. They were building up their forces like they were getting ready for war. The pattern was clear to anyone who knew how to look for it. Jake felt cold as he realized what this meant. The Vorthak were planning something big, and humans were in their way. Lisa explained that she had tried to talk to other alien leaders about this, but none of them seemed to care. The big powers of the galaxy were used to the Vorthak taking over smaller species. The meeting hall was full of aliens from across the galaxy when the 3 humans walked in. Jake found seats near the back where humans always sat. The important aliens sat near the front where everyone could see them. Humans had learned to stay quiet and listen during these meetings. The Vorthak, Ambassador Grizzlak, stood up to speak, and the hall got quiet. Grizzlak was bigger than most Vorthak, and his armor had marks from many battles. He spoke in the common galactic language, but his voice was rough and hard to understand. Grizzlak talked about Vorthak expansion and how they needed more worlds for their growing population. He said that smaller species should be happy to serve the Vorthak Empire because it would bring order to the galaxy. His words made it clear that he was not asking permission. When Grizzlak mentioned humans, his voice got mean, and Jake felt anger grow in his chest. The Vorthak ambassador said humans were soft and weak like most species from small worlds. He laughed as he said humans would make good workers once the Vorthak taught them their place. Other aliens in the hall said nothing. The Zephyrians looked at their glowing screens and acted like they were not listening. The Calorians made soft clicking sounds but did not speak up. Everyone knew what was coming, but nobody wanted to get in the way of the Vorthak war machine. Lisa stood up to speak. But Grizzlack cut her off with a wave of his large hand. He said humans had nothing important to say because they had never won a real war. The Vorthak had studied human history and found it full of small fights between weak armies. He said real warriors did not need to listen to children. Jake watched. Other alien leaders nod their heads like they agreed with Grizzlack. These same aliens had been friendly to humans when they wanted something, but now they showed their true feelings. Humans were alone in the galaxy, and everyone knew it. The meeting ended with Grizzlack making it clear that Vorthak expansion would happen whether other species liked it or not. He looked right at Lisa as he said, weak species should prepare for big changes in how the galaxy worked. His meaning was clear to everyone in the room. Jake walked back to his ship with Lisa and Danny, and none of them spoke until they were alone. They all knew that everything had changed in that meeting room. The time of peace was over, and humans were about to face their first real test as a space-going people. Danny sent messages back to Earth telling them what had happened. Lisa started making calls to human colonies telling them to be ready for trouble. Jake looked out at the stars and wondered if humans were strong enough to survive what was coming. The galaxy was about to find out what humans were really made of. Admiral Frank Coleman stood in the war room on Earth watching 12 red lights go dark on the big screen in front of him. Each light had been a human colony with thousands of people living and working on distant worlds. Now they were all gone, and Frank knew exactly who was responsible for their deaths. The attacks had started 3 months after the meeting at the Galactic Council Station. The Vorthak hit fast and hard using their biggest warships to smash through the simple defenses that protected human settlements. The colonists never had a chance to fight back or even call for help. Lieutenant Ben Hayes ran into the room carrying a data pad with the latest reports from the battle zones. Ben was young, but he was one of the smartest tactical officers Frank had ever worked with. His job was to study enemy movements and figure out what they were planning next. Ben showed Frank the attack patterns on his screen and pointed out how organized the Vorthak assault had been. This was not random raiding or simple expansion. The Vorthak had planned these attacks for months, and they hit exactly the right targets to hurt humans the most. Frank looked at the names of the colonies that had fallen and felt sick to his stomach. New Boston had been home to 50,000 farmers who grew food for other human worlds. Bright River was where humans mined rare metals that they traded with alien species. The Vorthak had not just attacked random places, but had gone after the settlements that kept human civilization running. The communication system buzzed, and Frank answered it to find Dr. Elena Rodriguez on the other end. Elena worked in a secret facility that most people in the government did not even know existed. Her voice was calm, but Frank could hear the stress underneath her words. Elena told Frank that she needed to see him right away about something called Project Nightfall. Frank had heard whispers about secret military projects, but he had never been told any details. Elena said it was time for him to learn what humans had really been doing for the past 50 years. Frank took a fast transport to the hidden base, where Elena worked. The facility was built deep underground in the mountains far from any major cities. Security was tighter than anything Frank had seen before, and the guards checked his identity 3 times before letting him inside. Elena met Frank at the entrance and led him through long tunnels carved out of solid rock. She explained that Project Nightfall had started when humans first made contact with alien species. The project team had been studying galactic warfare and preparing for the day when humans might need to fight for their survival. The tunnels opened into a huge room filled with computers and screens showing information about every major military force in the galaxy. Frank saw detailed plans of Vorthak ships and weapon systems along with tactical analyses of how they fought their wars. The amount of information was incredible, and Frank realized humans had been watching and learning for decades. Elena introduced Frank to her team of military experts and scientists who had been working in secret to understand alien warfare. They had studied every major conflict in galactic history and had figured out the strengths and weaknesses of each species that might threaten human worlds. Dr. Marcus Stone was the computer expert who had built systems that could process tactical information faster than any organic brain. His machines could analyze battle data and suggest strategies in real time during combat. Marcus showed Frank how his computers had already figured out exactly how the Vorthak were attacking human colonies. The Vorthak were using their traditional formation tactics that had worked against other species for hundreds of years. They would send massive fleets to overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer numbers and firepower. Most alien species tried to match them ship for ship, and always lost because nobody could build fleets as big as the Vorthak Empire. Elena explained that humans had learned something important from studying galactic warfare. Most alien species fought the same way their ancestors had fought for thousands of years. They did not adapt or change their tactics because tradition was more important to them than winning battles efficiently. Ben Hayes had been working with Elena's team for 2 years, and he showed Frank what they had discovered about Vorthak weaknesses. The warrior aliens were incredibly brave and would never retreat from a fight, but they were also predictable. Their honor code meant they always attacked the same way and never used sneaky tactics. Frank learned that Project Nightfall had been preparing for exactly this situation. Human military thinkers had assumed that someday a larger species would try to conquer human worlds. The project team had spent decades figuring out how humans could fight back against enemies that were bigger and stronger. The answer was not to fight the same way other species did. Humans would use speed and surprise, instead of trying to match alien firepower. They would attack weak points and avoid direct confrontation with enemy main forces. Most importantly, they would use psychological warfare to make enemies afraid and confused. Elena took Frank to another room where she showed him plans for weapons and ships that looked nothing like anything other species used. Human military technology was designed around the idea that smaller forces could defeat larger ones if they were smart enough and ruthless enough. Ben brought Frank new intelligence that made everything more urgent. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Vorthak fleet moving toward human space. The fleet had over 800 warships, including some of the biggest battle cruisers the Vorthak Empire had ever built. Frank realized that the colony attacks had just been the beginning. The Vorthak were planning to invade human space completely and turn Earth itself into another conquered world. The timeline had moved up, and humans had to act fast or face total destruction. Elena asked Frank to authorize the activation of Project Nightfall's main weapon system. She explained that once they took this step, there would be no going back. The galaxy would see humans in a completely different way, and the age of being ignored and dismissed would be over forever. Frank thought about the 50,000 people who had died in the colony attacks and the millions more who would die if the Vorthak invasion succeeded. He thought about human children growing up as slaves to alien masters, and human worlds being strip-mined to feed the Vorthak war machine. The decision was not really a choice at all. Frank gave Elena permission to activate everything that Project Nightfall had been building toward for 50 years. He signed the authorization codes that would wake up humanity's real military power and show the galaxy what humans could do when they stopped being nice. Elena smiled for the first time since Frank had arrived at the base. She told him that construction crews had been waiting for this moment, and they could have everything ready in just a few weeks. The Vorthak thought they were attacking a defenseless species, but they were about to learn how wrong they were. Frank returned to his war room knowing that everything had changed. Humans were no longer going to hide behind diplomacy and hope that other species would protect them. They were going to fight back with weapons and tactics that would shock every military expert in the galaxy. The red lights on Frank's screen represented more than just lost colonies. They represented the end of human innocence and the beginning of something that would make aliens across the galaxy remember to never underestimate the quiet species from Earth. Chief Engineer Amy Walsh floated in her work suit outside the massive construction site, hidden deep in the asteroid fields beyond Pluto. The project had taken 20 years to build, and now it was finally ready for its first mission. Amy had spent the last 5 years of her life working on this ship, and she knew every bolt and wire in its hull. The UES Retribution looked nothing like the ships other species built. Where alien vessels were smooth and curved with flowing lines, the Retribution was all sharp angles and flat surfaces. The ship was over 1 kilometer long and covered in black armor that seemed to eat light rather than reflect it. Amy checked her work pad and saw that the final weapon systems had just been installed. The ship bristled with gun ports and missile tubes that were hidden behind armored panels until they were needed. Most alien ships put their weapons on the outside where everyone could see them, but humans had learned to hide their true strength. Captain. Roy Bennett walked through the corridors of his new command and felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Roy had fought in the last war between human colonies before Earth government had united everyone under one flag. He knew what real combat looked like, and he knew how to make the hard choices that kept his people alive. The crew of 1200 was already aboard, and they had been training together for 2 years. Every person on the ship had been chosen for their skills and their ability to work under pressure. Most of them had military experience fighting in small conflicts that the rest of the galaxy had never heard about. Roy walked onto the bridge and found his senior officers waiting for him at their stations. Chief Weapons Officer Patricia Wells was running final checks on the primary armament systems. Navigation Officer Steve Martinez was plotting courses that would let the ship appear anywhere in the solar system within minutes. Patricia showed Roy the test results from the main guns, and her eyes were bright with excitement. The kinetic bombardment systems could accelerate metal slugs to incredible speeds using magnetic fields that were stronger than anything other species had ever built. Each shot would hit with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The ship's armor was just as impressive as its weapons. Instead of energy shields that could be overwhelmed by concentrated fire, the Retribution used layers of composite materials that could absorb and spread out the impact of enemy weapons. The armor was designed to take hits from the biggest guns in the galaxy and keep fighting. Steve Martinez explained the ship's mobility systems to Roy and showed him how they could outmaneuver anything the Vorthak had in their fleet. The Retribution could make short jumps through hyperspace that would let it appear behind enemy lines or disappear when the fighting got too intense. Dr. Marcus Stone was in the computer center putting the finishing touches on the artificial intelligence system that would help coordinate the ship's combat operations. The AI was called Ares, and it could process tactical information faster than any organic brain in the galaxy. Ares spoke to Roy in a voice that was cold and precise like a machine, but somehow still sounded dangerous. The AI had studied every major space battle in galactic history and had developed new tactics that no alien commander would expect from a human ship. Roy asked Ares what it thought about fighting the Vorthak, and the AI responded immediately with detailed analyses of enemy weaknesses. The computer had already figured out 17 different ways to defeat Vorthak battle formations, and it was confident that human tactics would surprise them completely. Amy Walsh joined the senior staff meeting to report on the ship's construction status. Every system had been tested and retested until they were sure nothing would fail in combat. The Retribution was ready to show the galaxy what human engineering could accomplish when survival was on the line. The ship's medical bay was run by Dr. Helen Carter, who had treated combat wounds in 3 different colonial wars. Helen had seen what modern weapons could do to human bodies, and she had prepared her medical team for the worst. The sick bay could handle hundreds of casualties and keep fighting men alive through injuries that would kill most aliens. Lieutenant Danny Cruz had been transferred from Jake Morrison's ship to handle communications and intelligence gathering aboard the Retribution. Danny had spent years listening to alien military transmissions, and he could read their tactical intentions better than most of their own commanders. Roy gathered his crew in the main assembly hall to talk to them about their mission. He looked out at 1,200 faces and saw determination mixed with fear. These people knew they were about to make history, but they also knew that many of them might not survive what was coming. Roy explained that intelligence reports showed a massive Vorthak invasion fleet moving toward Earth. The enemy had over 800 ships, including some of the most powerful warships ever built. Traditional military thinking said that humans had no chance against such overwhelming force. But the Retribution was not a traditional warship. It had been designed by people who understood that humans could not win by fighting the same way other species did. They had to be smarter and more ruthless than their enemies. They had to use tactics that would shock and confuse aliens who had been fighting wars for thousands of years. Patricia Wells stood up to explain the weapon systems to the crew. The ship carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon, but that was not what made it dangerous. The real threat was how those weapons would be used in ways that no alien commander would anticipate. Steve Martinez, showed the crew how the ship's mobility would let them strike at enemy weak points and disappear before the Vorthak could respond. Traditional space battles were fought by big fleets shooting at each other until one side was destroyed. The Retribution would fight a completely different kind of war. Ares projected tactical simulations that showed how one human ship could defeat hundreds of enemy vessels by using hit-and-run attacks. The AI had calculated that psychological warfare would be just as important as actual firepower in breaking Vorthak morale. Roy told his crew that they were not just fighting for human colonies or even for Earth itself. They were fighting to prove that humans deserve to exist as an independent species in a galaxy full of predators. If they failed, then humanity would become slaves to alien masters for the rest of history. The crew responded with determination that made Roy proud to be their captain. These people understood what was at stake, and they were ready to do whatever it took to protect their species. They had trained for this moment their entire careers, and now they would find out if their preparation had been enough. Amy Walsh gave the final engineering report and confirmed that all systems were operating at full capacity. The Retribution was ready to leave its hidden construction site and take its place as humanity's answer to those who thought humans were weak. Roy gave the order to begin their journey toward Earth, where the Vorthak invasion fleet was already gathering. The ship moved out of the asteroid field like a predator emerging from hiding. The galaxy was about to learn that the quiet species had been preparing for war all along. Intelligence reports confirmed that other alien species were watching to see what would happen when the Vorthak reached human space. Most of them expected a quick conquest followed by the usual division of spoils among the victors. None of them were prepared for what humanity was about to unleash on its enemies. War Commander Thek stood on the bridge of his massive dreadnought Bone Crusher and looked out at the pathetic defenses that humans had arranged around their home world. 800 Vorthak warships had dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find a desperate fleet trying to protect Earth, but instead they found only one ship waiting for them in the dark void. Thex laughed as he studied the human vessel through his tactical screens. The ship was big for human standards, but it looked tiny compared to his battle fleet. The humans had painted it black, like they were trying to hide from superior Vorthak sensors. Their desperation was almost insulting to a warrior of Thex's reputation. The Vorthak fleet spread out into their traditional attack formation, with the biggest ships in the center and smaller vessels protecting the flanks. This formation had conquered 100 worlds and crushed dozens of alien species who thought they could resist Vorthak expansion. Today it would add humanity to the long list of defeated enemies. Captain Roy Bennett sat in his command chair aboard the UES Retribution and watched 800 enemy contacts appear on his tactical display. His crew was calm and focused as they prepared for the most important battle in human history. Every person on the bridge knew that the survival of their entire species depended on what happened in the next few hours. Roy opened a communication channel to the Vorthak fleet commander, and his voice was steady as he spoke. He identified himself and his ship, then offered the invaders one chance to leave human space peacefully. Roy knew they would refuse, but he wanted the galaxy to know that humans had tried diplomacy first. Thex responded with contempt and told Roy that humans were about to learn what happened to weak species who defied the Vorthak Empire. The war commander explained that human colonies would be stripped of resources and human survivors would serve as workers in Vorthak mining operations. Earth itself would become a military base for future conquests. Roy thanked Thex for making human intentions clear, then closed the communication channel. He turned to his weapons officer, Patricia Wells, and gave her permission to begin combat operations. Patricia's fingers moved across her control panel as she armed every weapon system on the ship. The Retribution fired first with a spread of kinetic projectiles aimed at the center of the Vorthak formation. The metal slugs accelerated to incredible speeds and slammed into enemy ships with devastating force. 3 Vorthak cruisers exploded instantly, and 2 more were crippled with massive holes torn through their hulls. Thex could not believe what he was seeing on his damage reports. No species in the galaxy used kinetic weapons that powerful, because the energy requirements were supposed to be impossible. The human ship had just destroyed 5 warships with its opening salvo, and was already firing again. The Vorthak fleet responded with everything they had. Hundreds of energy beams and missile swarms converged on the Retribution from all directions. The attack was powerful enough to destroy any ship that other species had ever built, but the human vessel seemed to absorb the damage without slowing down. Steve Martinez activated the ship's jump drive, and the Retribution disappeared from where the Vorthak weapons were aimed. The ship reappeared 3,000 kilometers away behind a group of Vorthak destroyers and opened fire before they could turn to face the new threat. Patricia Wells coordinated the point defense systems that created walls of fire around the Retribution. Vorthak missiles exploded harmlessly against the defensive screens, while human weapons found their targets with deadly precision. The ship fought like no vessel the Vorthak had ever encountered. Ares processed tactical information faster than any organic commander could think and suggested attack patterns that confused and disrupted Vorthak formations. The AI found weak points in enemy defenses and exploited them before the Vorthak could adapt to human tactics. Roy coordinated micro-jumps that allowed the Retribution to appear and disappear across the battlefield like a ghost. Traditional space combat involved fleets hammering each other with concentrated firepower, but the human ship refused to fight by the rules that other species followed. The Vorthak formation began to break down as commanders tried to track a target that would not stay in one place long enough to be destroyed. Ships collided with each other as they attempted to turn and face threats that appeared behind them without warning. The disciplined attack became chaos. Thex ordered his ships to spread out and surround the human vessel, but Roy anticipated this move and struck at the edges of the formation where individual ships were isolated. The Retribution would appear near a small group of enemy vessels and destroy them before jumping away to attack somewhere else. Danny Cruz monitored Vorthak communications and reported that enemy morale was breaking down. Vorthak commanders were arguing with each other about how to fight an opponent that did not follow traditional combat doctrine. Some ships were trying to retreat, while others were calling for desperate frontal attacks. The battle continued for 6 hours, and the Vorthak fleet suffered losses that no invasion force had ever sustained before. Patricia Wells reported that over 600 enemy ships had been destroyed or crippled, while the Retribution had taken only minor damage to its outer armor layers. Thex watched his proud fleet fall apart around him and felt something he had never experienced before in combat. The Vorthak war commander was afraid. His people were supposed to be the greatest warriors in the galaxy, but they were being systematically destroyed by creatures they had dismissed as weak prey animals. The Bone Crusher itself came under attack when the Retribution materialized directly above the massive dreadnought. Human weapons tore through Vorthak armor and disabled the ship's main engines. Thex found himself trapped aboard a crippled vessel while his fleet died around him. Roy opened a communication channel to broadcast on all galactic frequencies, so every species in known space would hear his message. His voice was calm, but carried an edge that made alien listeners understand they were hearing something new and dangerous in the galaxy. Roy identified himself and his ship, then announced that this battle represented humanity's response to unprovoked aggression. He explained that humans had tried to solve their differences through diplomacy, but the Vorthak had chosen violence instead. Now they would face the consequences of that choice. The human captain offered terms of surrender to any Vorthak vessels that were still capable of fighting. He promised that survivors would be treated according to galactic law, but warned that continued resistance would result in the complete destruction of the invasion fleet. The choice was theirs to make. Thex looked around his damaged bridge and saw fear in the eyes of warriors who had never known defeat. His communications officer reported that 17 Vorthak captains had already accepted human surrender terms. The mighty invasion fleet was broken, and the war commander's reputation was destroyed. Roy announced that this demonstration of human military capability was being recorded and transmitted to every major power in the galaxy. He wanted alien leaders to understand that humanity was no longer the helpless species they could ignore or threaten with impunity. The age of human weakness was over. The surviving Vorthak ships that accepted surrender were escorted to detention areas where their crews would be held until formal peace negotiations could begin. The ships that refused to surrender were systematically hunted down and destroyed by the Retribution as it moved through the battlefield like an angel of death. When the fighting finally ended, Less than 200 Vorthak vessels remained intact, and most of those were too damaged to fight effectively. The greatest invasion fleet in galactic history had been defeated by a single human ship, using tactics that no alien species had ever imagined possible. Ambassador Helen Carter walked into the main conference hall of the Galactic Council Station and felt the weight of thousands of alien eyes watching her every movement. 3 weeks had passed since the Battle of Sol, and representatives from every major power in the galaxy had come to Earth seeking emergency negotiations with the species they had once dismissed as harmless. Helen had been a minor diplomatic figure before the war, but now she was the most important person in known space. Alien ambassadors who had barely acknowledged her existence were now desperate to schedule private meetings. The balance of power had shifted overnight, and everyone wanted to be on the right side of humanity's new military strength. The Zephyrian delegation floated into the hall in their glowing energy suits and took seats much closer to the human section than they had ever sat before. The Calorians arrived in a group making nervous clicking sounds as they discussed what terms they might need to accept. Even the proud Torgan Republic had sent their highest-ranking officials to negotiate with the former outcasts. Admiral Frank Coleman sat beside Helen and reviewed the intelligence reports that showed how completely the galactic situation had changed. Vorthak territory was in chaos as subject species began revolting against their weakened masters. 3 different alien governments had already offered military alliances that would have been unthinkable just a month earlier. Dr. Elena Rodriguez took her place at the human delegation table and opened the files that contained detailed analyses of every major species' military capabilities. The information that Project Nightfall had gathered over 50 years was now the most valuable intelligence in the galaxy. Every alien leader wanted to know what else humans had learned about their weaknesses. The session began with the Galactic Council President formally acknowledging humanity's new status as a major military power. The ancient Calorian spoke carefully as he admitted that previous assessments of human capabilities had been completely wrong. The Council was prepared to offer humans permanent seats on all major committees. Helen stood to address the assembly, and her voice carried clearly through the vast hall. She thanked the Council for their recognition, but made it clear that humanity's goals had not changed. Humans still wanted peace and cooperation, but they would never again allow themselves to be vulnerable to aggression from any source. The Vorthak delegation was led by a junior administrator since War Commander Thex, and most of their military leadership were either dead or in human detention facilities. The surviving Vorthak official spoke humbly about his people's desire to negotiate a permanent peace treaty. The warrior species that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was begging for mercy from creatures they had planned to enslave. Helen listened to the Vorthak apology and then presented the terms that humanity required for peace. Vorthak forces would withdraw from all conquered territories and pay reparations to the species they had enslaved. Most importantly, they would surrender their entire battle fleet except for ships needed for basic defense of their core worlds. The Vorthak delegate tried to argue that these terms were too harsh, but Helen cut him off with a gesture. She reminded the assembly that humanity had offered peaceful coexistence before the war, and the Vorthak had responded with unprovoked attacks on civilian colonies. Now they would face the consequences of choosing violence over diplomacy. Admiral Coleman stood to brief the alien delegations on Earth's current military posture. He revealed that the Retribution was only the first of 12 identical vessels that were nearing completion. Human defensive installations throughout their territory had been upgraded with the same weapons technology that had destroyed the Vorthak invasion fleet. The aliens shifted nervously in their seats as Coleman explained that human military doctrine was based on defending against threats before they could become dangerous. Any species that appeared to be planning aggressive moves against human interests would find themselves facing immediate preemptive strikes from ships they could not detect or defeat. Dr. Elena Rodriguez presented the most shocking revelation of the conference when she displayed tactical analyses that showed detailed knowledge of every major species' military weaknesses. Humans had spent decades studying galactic warfare, and they knew exactly how to defeat anyone who might threaten them in the future. The Zephyrian ambassador asked how humans had gathered such complete intelligence about alien military systems. Elena smiled as she explained that humans were very good at watching and learning. While other species had ignored them as primitive newcomers, humans had been preparing for the day when they might need to defend themselves. Elena showed the assembly recordings of major galactic conflicts going back 200 years. Human analysts had studied every battle and identified the tactical mistakes that led to defeat. They had learned from alien failures and developed countermeasures that would work against any known combat doctrine. The revelation that humans had been secretly analyzing alien militaries for generations sent shockwaves through the conference hall. Species that had considered their military capabilities to be closely guarded secrets realized that humans knew more about their forces than their own generals did. Helen addressed the fear that was visible on many alien faces and assured them that humanity had no interest in conquest or domination. The human military buildup was purely defensive and would remain so, as long as other species respected human sovereignty. But any government that threatened human worlds would face the same fate as the Vorthak invasion fleet. The Calorian representative asked what role humans expected to play in future galactic conflicts. Helen explained that humanity would work to maintain peace between species and would offer protection to smaller governments that could not defend themselves against aggressive neighbors. This announcement created a buzz of conversation throughout the hall as alien delegates realized what Helen was proposing. Humans were offering to become the galaxy's peacekeeping force. Species that had been bullied by larger neighbors could now turn to humanity for protection. The conference continued for 3 days as new agreements were negotiated and signed. The Vorthak Empire agreed to all human demands and formally surrendered their claim to any territory outside their original borders. Other species lined up to sign mutual defense treaties that would put them under human protection. Captain Roy Bennett arrived at the station aboard the Retribution on the final day of negotiations. The massive warship docked at the council station and Bennett walked into the conference hall, wearing his battle-scarred uniform. The sight of the human captain who had defeated 800 Vorthak ships made alien delegates remember exactly why they were being so cooperative. Bennett addressed the assembly from the podium where Vorthak Ambassador Grizzlak had once mocked human military capabilities. The human captain's voice was quiet, but every word carried the authority of proven victory. He explained that the Retribution would remain permanently stationed at the galactic capital, as a reminder of humanity's commitment to maintaining peace. Helen concluded the conference by reading from the new Galactic Peace Accords that established humanity as the primary military force responsible for preventing future wars. The document was signed by representatives from 47 different species and became the foundation of a new galactic order. The final ceremony took place in the same hall where humans had once been ignored and dismissed. Now alien leaders competed for the chance to shake hands with human officials and pose for pictures that would show their people they had secured favorable relationships with the galaxy's new superpower. As the conference ended, Helen looked around the hall and thought about how much had changed in just a few months. Humans had gone from being the quiet species that nobody paid attention to being the force that shaped galactic politics. The transformation had been paid for with blood, but it had secured humanity's future among the stars. Bennett returned to his ship and prepared to begin permanent patrol duties around the galactic capital. Young alien military officers were already requesting permission to study aboard human vessels so they could learn the tactical innovations that had revolutionized space warfare. The lessons of the Battle of Sol would be taught in alien academies for generations to come. The last message of the conference was broadcast throughout the galaxy, so every species would understand the new reality. Humanity had sought only peace, but had been forced to prove their strength through war. They would never again be helpless against those who chose violence over negotiation. The galaxy had learned to respect the species that watched and learned and prepared for the day when their patience would finally run out.